Good morning. Welcome to today's lesson where we are looking at possibility spaces. So this is a continuation of the probability topic that we have been looking at. So let's get started. Initially, we're just going to think about listing outcomes. Now, you've hopefully thought about this before. For example, if I listed all the outcomes when I flip a coin, well, either I get a head or I get tails. That's all the outcomes of that event. So the event is flipping a coin, and then the outcomes are heads or tails. That's all you can get. Okay, so what about if we list all the outcomes when I flip two coins? Well, I could get a head and then a tails. I could get a tails, then a head. I could get a heads and then a heads. Or I could get tails, then tails. So there are four possible outcomes there. You could argue that two of those are the same, but let's stick with four separate ones. And then lastly, this question says list all the outcomes when I roll a die and flip a coin. So you could get one heads, you could get two heads, you could get four tails, and so on. There are lots here, so we need to come up with a systematic way of doing it, and that is where the possibility spaces comes in. So a possibility space can also be known as a sample space. That's something to be aware of. They are the same thing. This question asks us to list all the possible outcomes when I roll a six-sided die and flip a coin using a possibility space. Now, a possibility space is basically a table that is going to allow us to consider all of the possible outcomes. So we need a table. I'm going to start like this. Let's put our coin up here. So what are the possible outcomes? So we've got head or tails. And that's it for the coin. For the six-sided die, we'll assume it's fair. They need to be fair chance. Oh, that's not a 4, that's a 4. So there's our table, and then we just have to fill it in. If we got a 1 and a head, we're going to call that 1H or 1T, 2H, 2T, 3H, 3T, 4H, 4T, and so on. There we go. So that's finished. That's our sample space. We can see all the possible outcomes. We can see all the possible outcomes in a nice table, and it shows where they came from. For example, if we got 3T, we'd know that it came from 3T. Now that's quite obvious in this one, but going forward, it becomes less obvious. So let's look at another example. So this question asks us to use a possibility space to find the probability that we get a 4 when I spin these spinners, I'm going to call them A and B, and add their scores together. So we know we're going to need a possibility space because it tells us that in the question. We also need to add the scores together as we go. So this is going to be for A up here. We've got possible scores of 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then down the side, we're going to have B. We've got possible scores of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So let's add in lines for our table to make it really clear. Of course, when you're doing this, you will use a ruler and a pencil to make it nice and neat. So if we got a 1 on spinner A and a 1 on spinner B, we would have a score of 2. If we got a score of 2 on A and a score of 1 on B, we would have 3. If we got a score of 3 on A and a score of 4 on B, we would have a score of 7. I'm going to quickly fill this in. I'm sure that you could do this. It is best to do it systematically. Don't jump around like I did, but I was just trying to prove the point. Okay, so we now need to look at what the probability of getting a score of 4 is. You can see that there's 1 2, 3 4s. So that's going to be useful to us. So the probability of getting a 4 is going to be the number of 4s divided by the total outcomes. So that's going to be, well, we said there were 3 4s over, how many outcomes are there? Well, we've got a grid, a table that is 4 by 6, so that's going to be 24. You could count them if you needed to, but 3 over 24, which we're going to simplify to be 1/8. That is off the edge of the screen, but you get the idea. 1/8 is the final answer for the probability of getting a total score of 4. Here's a question for you to try. It wants you to create a sample space diagram to show the possible outcomes when 2 dice, we'll assume that they are 6-sided, are rolled and added together. So you're going to need a table that's going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for the first die, and then the same for the second die. It's really important that you remember that these parts here are just the headings. They're not included in your possible outcomes for the sample space, for the possibility space. Okay, so it's just this section that is needed. So it asks us to add them all together. So you could do that, and I'm not going to do that for you this time. But once you've done that, we need the probability of a total of 3, which would be the number of 3s over the total. Okay, and that would be the same for all of these questions. It asks you at the bottom here to simplify your answers where possible. So make sure you do that. You need to pause now and work out those probabilities by first creating the sample space on paper. Answers to follow. Okay, here are the simplified answers for these. Make sure that you have shown your working when you're doing these, and then make sure that you've simplified them. I make it 1/18, 1/6, 1/36, 5/6, 8/9, 1/2, 5/12, and then 7/36. So that works its way down, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Then on to the next question. This is just drawing some possibility spaces, sorry. I need you to draw them and label them and then send me a picture of them to double check them, please. Thanks very much.